Hello and welcome to CBT 101. If you're watching this video, it may be because you're a student studying the topic, or perhaps it's been recommended that you attend CBT to deal with some difficulty you're having in your own life. Or it may just be that you have more than perhaps a passing interest in the topic. So you're very welcome. In this video, I'll outline, to begin with, the cognitive model of emotion and what it is that we mean when we say the cognitive model of emotion. And then we'll look at the cognitive behavioral therapy approach, with particularly an emphasis on a particular type of anxiety. And hopefully that will help explain how the model approaches difficulties and what it might say a little bit about the difficulties we have. And therefore, what might we be able to do about those difficulties? So to begin with, let's use a simple example to outline the cognitive model. So I want you to imagine that you and a group of friends are looking forward to going out for a meal. It's been a long time since we've been able to get out. And now that things are becoming more back to normal, we are looking forward to going out and having a meal. So one of your friends says, listen, I'll come over to you and sure, we'll meet up and then we'll go together. So your friend comes over, and about half an hour before you're due to leave, you both get a message on your group chat saying, sorry guys, I've got to cancel. So the organizer has canceled. Now, as you get that news, you begin to notice something in yourself. You begin to notice that, well, you're a little bothered, a little upset, maybe even a little angry, and a bit frustrated about it. And you have a few words with your friend, and your friend seems, well, quite chilled out and not overly bothered, but you can't help feel upset, angry, and frustrated and annoyed, or any emotion you care to think about. Now, here's the thing. You both have received the same news. That is, that it has to be cancelled. But how you're feeling about this, and your friend over there, how they're feeling about it, is strikingly different. Now, we often think that events that happen cause us to feel a certain way. And it's common that that's taught. However, the cognitive model would say that situations and events don't cause us to feel anything. But situations and events can be triggers, or a word I prefer is cues, or an activating event. They can be something that brings up something in us that then results in how we feel about it. Now, in that example of getting the message that it's cancelled, the difference between you and your friend is that you're having certain thoughts about that are different to what your thoughts are. So, for example, if you examine that a bit more closely, it's probably possible you're thinking, oh God, why did this have to happen? Of all days, we really need this. We're not going to have any fun now. So in other words, you'd find a narrative or a thinking process, which is which is what cognitive means and what it relates to. You would find that you're thinking about it in a certain way, and that way you're thinking about it is driving how you feel about it, which is sad, deflated. And as a result of that, because you are feeling that way, that may have consequential behaviors. For example, it could be that you decide to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to reach out again. I'm not going to reach out to my friend to arrange something again because I've been let down. Okay? And of course, that behavior would have its own consequences. Now, what about your friend? Well, your friend didn't seem to be too bothered. So let's look at what the friend could be thinking. Well, if the friend is not overly bothered, they're probably thinking about it in a rather neutral way. Perhaps even an empathetic and sympathetic way, perhaps, towards the situation. For example, your friend might be thinking, oh God, I hope everything's okay. That was sudden. So their emotional reaction isn't as extreme, and perhaps might have an element of concern in it, and goes, well, maybe I should give them a call later and see how they are. So in your friend's case, the event that happened, if thought about quite differently, Therefore, the emotions they experience are far more neutral. And then the behavior of your friend might be, you know what, I'm going to call them up and see how they're doing. Okay, so I hope that gave a brief outline of what CBT would say. So what CBT is saying is, we feel the way we think. The famous philosopher Epictetus said, man is not disturbed by things, but by the view he takes of them. And that was thousands of years ago. So with that example out of the way, let's look at the cognitive behavioral approach to something that bit more clinical. So in my practice of my work, I work a lot with anxiety disorders and also OCD and related disorders. And there are many other practitioners who work with these as well. And for the purpose of explaining the CBT model here, I'm going to pick one of the 7 most common anxiety disorders. So one of the most common I would see would be social anxiety disorder. Now, before we even begin putting this and looking at this vis-a-vis the CBT model, it's important to appreciate the impact of such a condition as social anxiety disorder. This is not something mild whereby a person finds meeting groups a bit difficult or a bit uncomfortable, or it's just they'd rather just perhaps not always do that, and it's really just something they can get up and get on with. They can't, because social anxiety disorder is a very, very powerful condition, like all anxiety conditions are, which results in a person finding it nearly impossible and overcome with anxiety at the prospect of going and meeting people and going out into social situations. If they do manage to engage in a social situation, they often endure it, dealing with a lot of anxiety that's coming up, and find that they have to use different coping strategies to deal with it. So it's definitely something that warrants our attention. And as I said, I see it a fair bit in the work that I do. So let's now use an example like we used before, but now relating to someone who themselves has an social anxiety condition. So let's say, for sake of argument, that's yourself, and you're sitting down and you get a message. And the message is, hey, having a house party next weekend, love to see you, come along. Now think about, if you had the social anxiety there, what sort of feelings would come up? A lot of apprehension, worry, fear, any words you want to use that would be fitting for yourself, you can imagine would come up. And so it's tempting to think that the reason you're feeling that way has got to do with the fact that you received this message. The reality of it is, it's got very little to do with the fact that you received that message, although the message, you could argue, is the trigger. What's happening is, at a bit of a deeper level, is that message you are viewing through the lens of this being a threatening experience. In other words, you're having certain thoughts about a social situation. So let's just pause for a second to think about, well, what are the features of a social anxiety condition in someone? Well, someone with a social anxiety disorder is going to be extremely self-conscious around other people, not just people they don't know, but also people they know. They're also highly aware of how they are around other people, and would also feel like other people may be judging. Right? They may also think that people are, will laugh at them, or that when they're in a social situation, they will say something or do something that will somehow evoke a negative response, that they might look silly or sound stupid, or any number of different things. But the lens through which they process the prospect of going to such a situation is through a lens of, threat, that it would be an uncomfortable situation. Something might go wrong. I might make a fool of myself. And this internal narrative then drives those fear-based feelings. And of course, when we're in a state of anxiety, what does our body do? Well, our body physiologically begins to map and complement the fear messages, such as increased heart rate, deeper breathing. And all of these signals are terribly powerful because they actually reinforce the fact that what we are thinking of could actually happen. So they make what perhaps is only, and often is only, a perception of fear and a perception that something will go wrong into the very real thing. Okay? So when we have a thought about something, it drives the feeling we have about it. But then in the social anxiety, what do you think might happen behaviorally? Well, from my work in this area and from research in this area, we know that, well, there's a theme, a behavioral theme connected with a lot of anxiety conditions. And the behavioral theme tends to be avoidance. Those who are very anxious will have behaviors to try and cope with that anxiety. They tend to be behaviors that help, quote unquote, rescue them from a certain situation. So in the example I've just used there, can you imagine what might be a helpful, at least in that moment, response to that message? Well, you can imagine that someone who might be really bothered by that might just text back maybe a day later or even the same day and say, look, I'm busy that day. Now, when they do that, that will actually drop their anxiety. But it's a double-edged sword. It will drop anxiety, yes. But ironically, it'll keep the anxiety going. Why? Because we're not addressing the core of the issue. But here's the difficulty. Because the behavior, be it canceling the appointment, brings anxiety down, that behavior and other behaviors that the person might engage in to feel safer and feel more comfortable become ways of responding to the anxiety. And this can then close a loop on what we call a vicious cycle, which I will come on into other videos later on. We will do a video on these and how they actually play out. So what happens now is you've got the message over here, step one. This was the trigger or the activating event. So that's A. B is the person thinks about that in some sort of way, and very, very often in the social anxiety, it's through that lens of, you know, it will be threatening, it will be uncomfortable. The consequence of that is the emotions, which can be very, very strong. And the consequence of how we feel is what we will do. It's useful to think about behavior in CBT as a way of coping with feelings. And CBT is also very, very interested in understanding our emotions. Because when we feel a certain way, it's useful to look at how we're thinking about it, because both feeling and thoughts complement each other. And of course, when we feel something and think something, think and feel, whichever one, when they come together, as we know they do, because when you're feeling rather negative, there's a negative narrative going on. That becomes something fundamental for you. It becomes what's true for you. And that means no amount of someone telling you, don't worry about it, it's fine, is going to make any difference. So I hope that outline gives you an initial understanding of the cognitive behavioral model. And just as described there, how it might link in with a social anxiety. So in terms of moving forward then from that, what we're really, really interested in is helping a person understand their own particular either depressive or anxiety cycles, whatever it is they find themselves experiencing. We want to capture what that is. And there's 4 fundamental things we want to try and understand when some event or something is causing distress in someone. And that is, we want to know, first of all, how do they feel about it? Of course, you might say that's obvious. Well, it's not obvious for everyone. Some people need support in accessing their feelings. We want to know, how do they feel? We also want to know, as per the cognitive model, how are they thinking in a certain situation? We also want to know, what do the thoughts and feelings make them want to do? So what's their way of feeling better? And we also want to know, what is that like in your body? What's your body process doing? You know, do you get wobbly? Do you get dizzy? Because in mental health issues, just like health issues, in fact, it's health issues we need to be talking about here. There's a lot of mental in the physical and a lot of physical in the mental. So if you're quite anxious, it's also quite a physical thing. And what's physical is also affecting the mind. If my heart rate is beating very fast, and I'm perspiring and I'm hypervigilant, well then I will believe that there's something to be concerned about, or there's some potential risk coming in, even though there possibly isn't. So that's an example. I hope you found it somewhat helpful. Do feel free to drop me an email, johngpwills@gmail.com, if you would have any suggestions and likes going forward. I'm going to be following on from here into our next video, and the next video will be entitled Cognitive Distortions, What Are They and Why? And these are really, really interesting things that we encourage clients to look at in their lives, if they're coming for help, is to understand how we can all think about things, perhaps not in the most accurate a way as perhaps we could. Okay, so that'll be really, really helpful. So thank you for watching. Take care. See you again.